Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're updating Barbie. Now, the last time I did an update on Barbie, I showed you the day that she really came together across her back and really released all the tension on the underside of her neck. And we saw that for the first time. So today is the first time I will have ridden her without lunging her before I get on to warm up that back, because I never like to get on just right away unless I'm pretty sure that the horse is consistently over its back, otherwise I would lunge them first. But now that this horse is moving really nicely over her back, so I try a day here to see how she goes, just mounting and see how everything goes from there. And so far she feels quite good. Of course, remember in the beginning of every session, I'm always just trying to get the horse to stretch out and begin to get that flow of the walk. As we see here now, she has a pretty good steady 4-beat walk, stretching out into the contact. Now remember with this horse, some of the concerns are that when we got her, she had a very stiff underside of her neck and she had been very much broken over in the third vertebra. So what I'm looking for today here is I'm going to work on beginning to develop a sitting trot with her and bringing her up into a working gaits as best she can without allowing her to break over in the neck. So you'll see me come back to the trot stretch many times and walk stretch many times when she starts to curl up. That is, that she starts to break over at the third or fourth vertebra in the neck. So with every horse that we ever train, they all have a little different position of their head and necks, and that depends on where they need to be. So in other words, a horse that has a big sloping shoulder with a neck that comes straight up out of the body and over, that kind of horse is going to ultimately have a much higher head and neck set than one that's built like this. That doesn't mean they can't collect. So this horse is built very much with very horizontal, you might say, in that her neck comes straight out of the body and doesn't have a lot of upward slope to it. So I have to ride the horse where it comfortably can be ridden. And of course, that's what ends up with so many horses being damaged, that people not realizing that very fact, that, you know, just because one horse can be in one position doesn't mean the next one can. So many people today are trying to make every horse, no matter what their conformation is to start with, look like something that it's not. That is, by forcing the head and neck higher. And when we do that, all the horse can do is break back in the third or fourth vertebrae. That's why horses become broken back there, because after they reach that point where the head and neck becomes too high, the back just drops, and no amount of whatever you do is ever going to get the horse to flex correctly at the pole until you get the back to come up and stay there with it. So here you can see that I'm bringing the horse up into a working walk, and she does that pretty nicely without breaking over too much. So you'll see how I experiment. If I see her start to break over, she starts to curl a little bit, then I'll immediately let her back out through the neck. But I was very pleased with this today. Once again, as this is one of the first days I've ridden her without lunging her beforehand, giving her back a chance to warm up. But it came right up underneath me. Now you can see her here as I bring her up a little bit. She wants to curl a little bit, wants to get her neck a little bit too short. And you can see how that starts affecting the movement in the back end of the horse. That is, it starts to slow down and the step begins to shorten. So as soon as I feel that step begin to shorten, I'm just going to come right back to the stretch and the walk again and just reestablish that big open swinging walk. So it's as simple as that. We always must be very judicious in what we do and be sure that we, in other words, with the front end of the horse, and being sure it doesn't have a bad effect on the back end of the horse, which is the part that we actually ride and is necessary to be there and engaged for everything else to work correctly. So as soon as I feel that shortening, however, you'll see how I come right back to that stretch again and get her neck way out in front of me again like that. But I'm very pleased about this horse. You see she starts to go down and she doesn't just immediately curl back. See how the nose begins to go out and down. So that tells me that the horse is really beginning to stretch all the way from the top of the withers there, which I know is what I need in order to change the back of the horse. As you have all experienced, if you've been doing this for a while, you will have experienced the helpful hints of all your friends who ride horses, who will tell you things like, horses should never stretch. Somebody wrote to me the other day and said that the horse should never stretch below the withers. Well, I don't know how that's possible, since the horse is already below the withers to start with, but maybe they meant something else. But you get my point, is if we ride the front end, the back end is going to deteriorate. And whenever soon as we feel that deterioration in the movement, there's nothing we can do that's going to help anything, except for let the neck back out and let the horse reestablish that swing. So you can see here I'm taking the horse through these basic elements, just like we all do every day. I'm using the leg yield, which how nicely she steps under the body. And as I get the leg yield to come over and through, the horse pushes the back up and I get a much longer and deeper stretch out of the walk. And you can see as she goes down, you can see that break coming and going in her neck as she starts to drop down. Now, there's not any time that I ever have any backwards pressure on these reins. With a horse like this, all I can do is lift my hands up a little bit and bring the pole up and out, trying not to curl it back. Because if I take any backwards tension at all, horses that have already been broken the third vertebra, that's all they're going to do is come behind the bit and the back end will stop moving. But you can see here now that I bring her up a little bit more. See how she wants to break there? I'm trying for a little bit shoulder in here. So it starts to get better as I go, but you can still see how she wants to curl up a little bit and come behind the vertical. We always know with all these horses that have been overflexed in the neck that it's always going to take us at least about a year to straighten that out. Now this one, fortunately, her back was not damaged. It was stiff and tight, but it wasn't damaged in sway back the way so many are. So I'm able to make pretty quick improvements in this horse because I'm not having to deal with a horse that is so dropped in the back that I simply have to wait for that to happen. Now you'll see as I go through this, one of the points I want to make in this is what we try to do in terms of bringing them up. You know, many people get the erroneous impression with Art to Ride that all we do is ride around with these horses stretch. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. As soon as I can stretch all the way down and I get the horse to really lengthen the entire top line, I'm going to start trying to bring the horse up as far as I can on every given day. Now that's pretty good there. She's coming up. She's wanting to shorten the neck back a little bit. You can see how she wants to jig a little bit rather than lengthen and step through. It's easier for the horse to give you a bad trot than to give you a good walk. So very often they'll try to jig with you because it seems easier to them in the beginning. Lack of understanding as well. So you can see that I try to bring her up and you'll see how the back end begins to shorten a little bit. Not as bad as it did before. But that's not too bad. And of course I come right back and I'll start to begin to stretch her here as soon as she starts to shorten behind. As you see how the back end rather falls out behind once in a while. When that head comes up, you can literally see the back legs falling out behind her. So I'm always experimenting. I'm looking for that place where the horse can stay up through the back, but yet come up as high as it can through the pole. So not too bad there. We're still getting a pretty big step. She's still reaching forward and stepping well into the track of the front foot. You can see right there how she kind of loses for a second, tosses that head a little bit, and what effect that has on the back end of the horse. That's what we always have to keep looking at. What is whatever we're doing having an effect on the motor of the horse, so to speak, and its mechanic ability to keep stretching through and working correctly. So a little better here. I brought her up, but you see how she begins to struggle. The step begins to get a little bit flatter and shorter. The hocks aren't flexing as much. She tries to jig there a little bit. So I will come right back to the stretch again as soon as I feel that shortening. Let it all the way back, reestablish my big forward swing. So getting back to my point here, it's not that I don't try to bring them up. I do, right from the very beginning. As soon as I can get a good stretch the way you see this horse is stretching. Now look at the difference in the walk and the stretch and see how the walk is really starting to over-track now, how it really begins to open up coming forward. That's what I want to be able to preserve. So ultimately when I bring the horse's pole up into the working walk, I want that not to change at all. Here I bring her up again a little bit, now working for a shoulder in a little bit. Now you can see there's a little hesitation there, but that time the step stayed a little bit bigger, even though I brought her pole up. She kept stepping underneath the body, so I was very pleased with that. Much better rhythm that time around. Now it's been very hot. Now here you see I'm going to try a little bit of half pass. So this will be the first time I've attempted to do the half pass. See how she tries to change the bend back to the bend to the right. So I'm trying to keep her bent a little bit to the left and get her to track over and underneath her body, which is much more difficult than doing a shoulder in or a leg yield. Because now we have to move into the direction of the body. But for her first attempt at that, after she straightened out a little bit, it was not too bad. But you could also see how it shortened her. She started to get a little bit anxious about that. We saw a little bit of swishing of the tail. This told me that I was beginning to get to the point where she was beginning to be a little uncomfortable in that. But I was very happy with the effort that she made, so I let her right back out in the stretch again. Once again, as soon as I feel the horse shortening or the back dropping out from underneath me, which usually happens at the same time, I'm going to get it right back out again and find that forward swing. I always want to keep that rhythm. It's like music, music that is, if you ever hear a band play that has no rhythm, we quickly lose interest in it. Well, the same thing is true of horses. The rhythm tells us how effective we're being. So if we feel ourselves losing the rhythm, we know that we're getting into the realm of something the horse isn't capable of doing. And as soon as we feel that happen, we should know that whatever we're doing is not going to have any positive effect on the horse, because as soon as they drop their back and shorten their stride, nothing's going to happen that's really worth doing. So I have to come right back and let her stretch back out again. But I was very happy with her today, especially considering that I didn't lunge her at all today. So it's the first time I've done that. I didn't warm up her back first. So here I come back and I try the half pass again. So we see that I'm keeping the angle a little bit more open this time and just asking her to just step over a little bit. And that time she didn't revert, that she didn't bend back in the opposite direction when I first started out. And there she gets a couple of pretty good tracks over, pretty good steps over. And kept a pretty good rhythm. Here it gets a little short again. So after that, I'm going to come right back to the walk again, let it stretch back out. But I was very pleased with that. We saw a clear improvement in it. The way I go about working, I never do anything more than 3 times. It's kind of not to say that I never would, but once in a while. But it would be very rare that I'd go beyond trying anything more than 3 times. It's kind of 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. And that's a good rule to follow, because you just don't want to get into something that the horse isn't too capable of doing and just keep doing it over and over again. So here I make a transition to the trot sitting. She did that pretty well. She didn't just totally invert on me, shortened there for a little bit of a second. But I could feel that her back was coming up and staying up underneath me through that transition, so that was quite nice. I was pleased with that, and I moved right on. Now you notice I don't get stuck on, was it a perfect transition? No, it wasn't a perfect transition, but it was pretty good and better than that she's done before, so I move right on to the next thing. I'm not going to go back and repeat it. One of the worst things you can do in training horses is to get hung up on the minutia of things like just making a transition. Because if the horse's back is strong enough to make the transition, they just will without too much difficulty, or without having to do it over and over again. Where when I watch people just working transitions, I've heard people say this many times, oh, transitions over and over again. And pretty soon the horse is just hollow and going in a very short stride. And that's one of the biggest things, is we have to be sure as trainers that we're not mistaking shortening of stride for balance. Most horses today are ridden hollow, and when people do what they think is collecting, really all they're doing is shortening the horse's stride. And that gives them a false impression of balance, because the horse really, quite frankly, isn't moving anywhere. So we have to be sure that we're always working over the horse's back. Now here I've asked her to come up, and really this is really quite nice. You can see that she's keeping the underside of the neck completely relaxed. She has a good steady rhythm. And once again, watch how this horse's legs are moving together. When she's correct, we see that perfect coordination between the front and back end. So those legs move perfectly together in unison. If you go back and watch videos of horses, I suggest we've been looking for horses, looking for Karen for a new horse to buy, which hopefully she's found. But we've looked at hundreds of videos of young horses, and every one of them is out of rhythm. They're all being forced into a phony frames, and they don't take 2 steps that actually look like they have any real rhythm to them. So I'm pleased with this, because the rhythm is maintaining quite well, which tells me she's staying nicely over her back. I was able to bring her pole up without her just totally breaking over. So that's a very good thing. I try for a little bit of a shoulder 4 here. Neck is a little shorter than I want it to be. So I let it right back out again. Now this is a horse that's just starting to be able to do really nice stretches. When I start out, I look for just a little bit of stretch, so my goal today is to get her to take that stretch all the way down and to get used to the weight of my back sitting on her and seeing if I can maintain that. Now know that once we can start sitting to the trot, all your horses will start to actually gain muscle much much more quickly. You think about it kind of this way. When we rise to the trot, we're actually only working half of the horse at a time, so to speak, because the balance is completely different. In one stride we're sitting, and one side we're not. This is why it's so important that we change directions. Now you can see here this is still flowing quite nicely, not quite as deep a stretch as I want, so I don't have quite the release to where I want it to be. That is, I would like her to stretch deeper than she's doing here, but this is a good start. Hind legs are still stepping well and energetically up underneath the body. And you'll notice when we watch me ride, there's not any time that I stop and start trying to cram a horse together. And here I asked her to just come up into that working trot. We see there's still that slight little over break in the neck a little bit that tends to want to put her a little behind the bridle, which is why I keep coming back. So here I begin to experiment with the sitting trot. And I feel she's still struggling a little bit, so I let her have more length in the neck so she can keep her back up underneath me. Because as I said, I could feel her back beginning to soften, that is wanting to sink a little bit on me. So I let the neck back out till I found the place where she's able to maintain that. So I was happy with that. She kept her back up underneath me for that period of time. And I come right back to the stretch and begin to work the stretch a little deeper. But notice how throughout all of this, I keep flowing forward in my workout. You remember the old masters used to say forward and straight. And what they meant by that was to engage forward under the body. So here again, I sit to the trot. And she stayed really nicely up through the neck that time. Got a little bit, see how she flattened there a little bit? So I had to come back to a rising trot because she suddenly dropped her back out from underneath me. So I reestablished that forward swing by getting off of her back for a second. If we keep sitting, and just know that the roll curve, you know what the roll curve is, where horses are drawn, their noses are pinned to their chests, and they're actively, violently beaten until they raise their backs up. That's an attempt to bring it back up, but that brings the back up in tension when you do that. And anything that creates more tension in the body horse is ultimately going to be destructive to the body of the horse. So here I sit to the trot again. We saw that time there was really no change in the rhythm at all. She stayed up really quite nicely underneath me, though she wants to curl a little bit. So as soon as I feel her starting to curl, even though I stayed in the sitting trot, I gave her a little more length in the neck. And then as she began to drop her back a little bit, I just came right back to the rising trot. And here again, I work with a sitting trot a little bit. Once I reestablish, I get the back to feel that it's up underneath me. In other words, I can feel the wave carrying me forward, and that's what we want it to feel like. Like I'm sitting out in the ocean on a boogie board, and that impulse is carrying me straight and forward. Now notice as I sit how my leg stays directly underneath me. Watch how when I sit to the trot, how I keep my toe just slightly lifted. That's the feel that you need to lengthen your leg down, but without any tension. So here I work for a little bit of lengthening. So after I do that little sitting trot, it shortens her a little bit. I come right back and do a bit of a lengthening stride. Now notice how much better the stretch is now. So after that, now she's beginning to stretch a little deeper. She's beginning to swing a little more actively over her back. And you see how involved I have to stay in this. People have asked me many times, like, don't I get bored doing this? And you can see that. I mean, I have to be so actively involved. There's never any time to be bored in the process of this. If you're a rider who's bored, you must be a very boring person, or you're not paying attention to what you're doing. To do this well takes an ultimate extreme level of concentration. Now, how nicely she set through that. She didn't drop her back. And once again, as soon as she did, now I'm coming back and asking for a little more lengthening again. See how I got a little bitter length of stride that time? And I come right back to the stretch again after that as I let her get deeper into the stretch, and I loosen her back up through those lengthenings. But today was the best I've gotten out of her in terms of sitting trots, the best I've gotten out of her in terms of lengthening the stride. So it's really getting consistent. And notice how we just keep flowing through this workout. There's no great resistance on her part. Whenever you see a little resistance, which is her shortening the stride, you notice how I just come right back to the stretch again. But I keep flowing forward in rhythm. Just like good music, it's got to have rhythm. If it doesn't have rhythm, there's something wrong with it. And remember, when we talk about rhythm, we're talking about the rhythm between the two ends of the horse, not the speed that the horse is going. We're always looking, when you see the trot, At any level, all the way through collection, the diagonal pairs must stay connected. They must swing together on the same plane. If they do not, if you see, as you're seeing in so many upper level horses today, literally almost all of them, you'll see that the hind legs do not come through in the extended trot. What's being accepted in the show ring today is something much more akin to a Spanish trot than it has anything to do with a real working or collected trot. Spanish trot was an old phony hollow back thing that they used to perform where the horse would throw its front leg straight out forward without coming through behind. And of course, it was never a movement that was very well accepted or accepted by the classical riders because they recognized the damage that that would do to the leg and that would be counterproductive. Remember, the whole goal of dressage is to perfect the three natural gaits of the horse. Unfortunately, nowadays in dressage, we're seeing gaits that are artificial gaits. They're created by hollowing the horse's back. And if you're doing that, you're in the realm of saddlebreds and Tennessee walkers and out of the realm of dressage. And of course, the real proof is in the pudding. If your horses are falling apart, if you're spending more time with your veterinarians than you're spending riding your horse, that's probably what you're doing, and that's why. So yes, horses can do things that look very extreme and quite flashy to people who don't know what they're looking at, but because they're not looking at the damage being done on that given day. So you can see how that stretch got a little bit deeper. Here I bring her back up and I sit again to the trot. How nicely she stayed right there is the best working trot we've gotten sitting yet. There was no change in what the back end were doing. She tends to want to shorten her neck up a little bit when I go to the sitting trot. And once again, let me remind you, there isn't at any time that I have any backwards pressure on the mouth of this horse for more, and even any contact that I take is for only a few seconds at a time. Now that time I was able to do a pretty good shoulder in. I would like the shoulder to be a little bit wider. I would really call that a shoulder 4 that I was doing there today. But you could see that she was able to keep the neck active and keep moving actively that time better than she had done before. And once again, as soon as it shortens, I come right back to the stretch to reestablish, refresh the back again, then come back to it again. Now notice the quality of the stretch now is getting deeper and more swinging, and she's getting more fully over her back. So once you have felt what it feels like to have a horse come up and carry you, you will always want to recreate that, and that's what we never want to lose. A horse at the highest level should feel like it wants to stretch into the contact, or that it is stretching into the contact, to reach out and take contact with your hand, not to draw its neck back and come away from your hand as we see so many horses doing today. So I'm very pleased with that. So for the first day that I was able to ride this horse without lunging at first and trying that, I was very pleased with where she came to. She's getting strong enough to maintain and carry my weight in the sitting position, so I'm very pleased with that. And look at the trot here now is more open. This is a better working trot. So I only started this horse about 3 months ago. Now that's really quite nice there. She starts to curl just a little bit. See how she started to stall for 1 minute? But that time I didn't come out of the sitting trot. I stayed there and just put a little leg on. She came right back up underneath me again. So very pleased with that. So again, notice how relaxed my legs are. And know also that it takes years to develop these techniques. That's one of the hardest things for people to realize, because dressage has been dumbed down to the point where people think they can ride for a year and go Grand Prix. Well, there's nobody in the world that ever developed the skills in a year to be able to go Grand Prix. It takes about 5 years with someone who's in shape to develop these skills. So you can count on it taking that long. But unfortunately, nowadays, everything has been dumbed down, so that the trainers can train the horses quicker. You know, all of our old goals and principles by which we worked have all gone out the window. So pretty good there, not quite as big as it was a moment ago when I sat. You can see how she starts to curl down a little bit, and once again, as soon as she does that, now I can feel that she's starting to get tired. I had a pretty good lengthening there. She started to swing through a little better. So what I was doing there, just reestablish the open flow and come back to it. So I was very pleased with her today. So for her first day without being lunged first, her back stayed up underneath me. I was able to correct it wherever. Notice how beautifully she worked. There was never any major resistance in anything that we did. There was never any jamming on the brakes and reining the horse back furiously and all the things that we see people doing. You know, you can see how I'm keeping her there. There's no need for draw reins and all these artificial gait things that we see people adding. Very nice there. She stayed up very nicely, keeping the pole up there. And you can see how it wants to break back a little bit in that neck a little bit. But the trot is staying deep underneath my body, and I was very pleased with that. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Notice how nicely she made that downward transition, right forward and right back into the stretch again. Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Hope that helps. I was very pleased with this horse today. So once again, that was only, she's been in training for about 3 months to come to that point. So this is a horse that wasn't damaged, my point being. So many of you that are riding these horses that are sway back, it's going to take you longer. So just always know that you've got to heal the horses before you can get to this point. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. See you soon.